Bore da. My name's Margo Thomas. I'm the Deputy Head of Lamphy, and I've just returned to the classroom after a secondment with Eru as a Network Leader of Learning for the Pembroke Cluster. My presentation is really just about the journey I've been on since I've gone back into the classroom and really wanted to develop the curriculum for Wales in my classroom. I'm not saying I've got it right yet, but it's been a grand 4 weeks. So these are some of the areas that I felt as a practitioner I wanted to really get to grips with returning back to the classroom. After nearly 30 years of teaching, there are still elements that I feel that I need to address in my own practice. The pupil voice for me has become extremely important. I want my pupils to be completely active participants in their own learning. I want them to drive their learning. I want them to assess and evaluate what they've done and actually be the main voice in moving that learning forward. So, I've joined a class 2/3 through the year, and I wanted immediately to engage them, and so we had to find a common interest. And our common interest was picture books, and more importantly, it was related to the author Sean Tan. Now, we chose a book, Secada, because none of the children had actually been familiar with this text, and we looked purely just at the very first cover pages. And Sean Tan in this book creates a very grey world. It's a city, and so our first movement towards creative writing was trying to create a visual representation of this grey world. And we needed to find a common language. And what I realised is that by having that interdisciplinary approach, we moved into expressive arts. We really researched, we immersed ourselves in grey as a colour. In the end, we ended up making our own swatches. The children designed their own paint cans, their own colours, their own names, and at the moment, all of those are in a local paint shop where customers are actually voting on which colour paint they would actually buy. And from that, we were able then to delve deeper, to get a deeper understanding of the language that would be most effective for our readers. But I didn't just want engagement from my pupils, I wanted passion. I wanted that investment. And so from that, we looked at the character in the book. They still at this stage hadn't seen the book. The character in this book is a person who works in this grey city, in a grey building, in a grey office. And it's told in the first person from his viewpoint. Work in tall building, data clerk. 17 year. No sick day, no mistake, no promotion. Always stay late. Finish work. No thanks. Co-worker, no like. Say things. Do things. 17 year, retire. No party, no handshake. Bossy, clean desk. No work, no home, no money. Following this extract of the text, the children were absolutely outraged. And this led us down a path that I wasn't expecting. We ended up in the world of work. And they actually devised questionnaires for all the staff in our school to find out how they felt about their workplace, about their well-being, which was extremely interesting. That led quite naturally into the rights of the child and resulted in the charter in the classroom being completely revolutionised. But from the stilted language in the text, the children picked up that perhaps the person in this text wasn't speaking in their native tongue. And from the language that appears later in the text, blocks, downtown. They thought it might be America. And so we led into the discussion of why do people move away from their culture, move away from their countries. And through data and statistics, we looked at refugees, current areas involving migration and immigration. This led us inevitably to the Windrush generation and to really look at some of the recent political events based around this area. Now, this was certainly an area that I hadn't put in my initial viewpoint of where this topic would be going. Then I showed them the main character of this book. Not a human at all, but a cicada. A cicada in a human world. So we looked at the cicada. It's an amazing creature. It starts life as a little rice egg in a tree where it's in a little groove. As it becomes a nymph, it crawls out of that groove and it lets itself fall to earth. Once it's on the ground, it then burrows down into the darkness. And it stays in that darkness for 17 years. Initially, experts thought it was just hibernating, sleeping, but it's been proven that in those 17 years in the darkness, underground, it's constantly tunneling, it's constantly working and feeding itself. After 17 years, it burrows back out of the soil, back into the light. And it climbs up the tree from whence it's been feeding from its sap. And halfway up the tree, it has this momentous occasion. It transforms itself. It sheds its exoskeleton, it opens its wings, and it's able to fly. And it also develops a voice. In the book, the cicada, after he's lost his job, no thanks, he walks through the office, up the stairs, up to the rooftop, and he stands on the very edge of the building. And at this stage, my children are, oh no, what's he doing? But it's this moment in the book that the cicada is transformed. And he flies away from this grey city, from this grey building, from this grey existence, back into nature. And so that provided lots of stimulus for creative writing. But on the reverse, we also looked at the Windrush generation, who bravely left the colourful Caribbean to enter the grey cities and the grey skies of the UK. Science and the life cycle came automatically into our work then, and we looked at the life cycle of the cicada. But then something quite unusual happened. I was very mindful I wanted to develop a growth mindset in my classroom, and I had, from reading lots and lots of different books related to this area, I got a mindset of how I was going to do that. The children, though, started talking about their work in terms of the cicada. That right at the very beginning of their work, that perhaps that was like the egg part of a cicada, because at this moment they were completely invested in this character. And then we talked that underneath, that 17 years that the cicada is underneath the soil, that's a bit like when you're learning a skill. You're still a bit in the dark, but you're getting there and you're keeping busy. You're working towards a common goal. And that when we get to the point where actually you can apply that skill across the curriculum in different contexts, you're almost shedding that misconception, the lack of confidence. And then finally, once you're independent in that skill, you've learnt to fly. And you've found your voice in that skill. And this has become now a mantra in my classroom. To be cicadas, to be those pupils that can learn to fly, that can find their voice, I also believe they've got to be constantly questioning what I give them. And the quality of those questions often relate to the depth of their understanding, the depth of their thinking. Now, as a teacher coming back in after a short secondment, I know questioning is an area that I've got to get to. I think I'm chirping in questioning. I'm not yet there singing. But I'm working on things like question sandwiches, where we raise a question, we do an activity, we go back to that question and see how much better we can answer it. After every lesson, I want to know from them what went well in their work. What could they do better? What could I do better to improve their learning? Looking at differentiation of questions, looking at the chilly aspect, hot questions, mild questions, and also looking at pre-assessment, questioning the children on what they already know, so that I'm not wasting their time by teaching them what I think they should know. My question also permeates outside the classroom door. As soon as they enter, there's a question on the day on the door. So they enter my classroom thinking, there are no right answers to this. It's a very personal judgment. So questions galore. Valuing a question for a question's sake. Knowing what a good question is. We now have a gold leaf book where a good question goes into. Differentiation of questioning in my classroom is something as a practitioner I'm learning to do in a much better and more effective way. By putting numbers on the desk, I'm able to ensure that I've got a range of questions, the sophisticated questions, open-ended, closed. Using coloured cups so that the children can also choose what level of questioning they would like in each session. To end my presentation, I found this lovely quote by Vincent Van Gogh. And we all, once we've learned a skill, we want to bask in that warmth, in that confidence that we've got. And my main aim is that I want lots of little cicadas in my classroom, learning to fly, finding their voice, questioning everything around them. But before I came to this presentation, a little lad said this to me yesterday. "Hey, miss, can you hear me? I'm chirping." He'd spent 2 weeks trying to get to grips with improper fractions and had finally had his Eureka moment. After 30 years, all I can say to you is we're entering a wonderful time in education. Just be brave enough to keep getting your exoskeleton off, shedding off perhaps practice that you're no longer thinking makes the maximum impact on your pupils, and get out there, get flying, and get singing. Thank you.